Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements. And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello.
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. WNBA season is here. Pumped up. What a great time to be a basketball fan. NBA playoffs are coming down to the wire. As I record this, there's only 5 teams left. There's a Denver OKC Game 7, and then we'll know the semifinals. We'll know the Final Four of the NBA. But this episode is going to be all about the WNBA as we just saw the season start over the weekend. I'm not going to really get into the results of those games on this episode. My plan is to cover all 13 WNBA training camps today and give the audience a sense of what went into the roster decisions, the salary cap implications, both in the short term and long term. And next week, I'm going to then round out some research that I've already been doing on results of the 2020 through 2024 WNBA draft. Obviously, as training camp ends here in 2025, we have some final analysis to do in terms of how many players from those 5 draft classes ended up making rosters in 2025. I haven't done that work just yet, but I'll be able to then calculate sort of projected earnings for this year, and hopefully I'll be able to do some cool things with those numbers and present that next week. And then, we'll have some other items to address. Business of basketball never sleeps. A very exciting time. As in the NBA, I'm still reeling from the draft lottery and the implications to the trade market, as well as free agency. So, a lot to cover. What I wanted to begin today's show with, I saw this floating around social media. And this dovetails actually nicely with the research that I was just referencing, and the hard system of the WNBA draft. It is unusually harsh and hard on young talent. And so this graphic has been floating around the 2023 first round. So this was the first round of the 2023 WNBA draft. We're talking about April 2023, so just over 2 years ago. Only 5 players from that first round are in the WNBA. And not necessarily with their original team. So Aaliyah Boston, number 1 overall pick. Yes, she's still with the Fever. Diamond Miller, still with the Lynx, number 2 overall pick. Maddie Seagrass, number 3 overall pick, out of Villanova. She remains with the Dallas Wings. But then picks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, not in the WNBA. 2 years in, no longer in the league, not presently in the league. We'll see if some of these players can bounce back and end up getting some hardship contracts or 7-day contracts or, rest of season contracts, substandard deals to continue their WNBA careers. The number 9 pick out of Tennessee, Jordan Horston, she is injured, so she's not going to play in 2025, but she did get her 4th year team option picked up by the Seattle Storm. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And finally, Zia Cook out of South Carolina. Now, she is no longer with the team that drafted her, But she is in the WNBA. She'll be with the Storm. But then we already knew number 11 pick Abby Myers and number 12 pick Hirsch out of France. She's not in the league either. So 2 years in and just about half of the first round out of the WNBA. So, pretty wild. Now, I made a reference a second ago to fourth-year team options. So I've talked about this before, but under the present CBA, very difficult to have a fully guaranteed contract. Teams can only have 6 guaranteed deals, but there is a carve-out for fourth-year team options. So for anyone who's familiar with the NBA, if you're a first-round pick, your contract's fully guaranteed for 2 years, and then the NBA franchise can exercise a team option in year 3 and in year 4. And then, those salaries are guaranteed. Those salaries are structured under the CBA based on where a player was selected. There's a formula. It's a little more complex than the current system in the WNBA, but it also benefits players, right? If you're a developing player on a certain trajectory, these salaries are affordable. They are controlled costs. And so NBA teams almost always exercise third-year options, and fourth-year options are also very common too. It would take a player really falling off of their trajectory for a team to not recognize the value. In the WNBA, it is not that way at all because of the hard salary cap environment, because of the urgency by which teams need to compete and fill out a legal roster. If you have an 11th player or a 12th player that can't contribute, whether that be because of physical ailments, mental ailments, emotional ailments, right? Young players go through a lot of stuff. And just, year after year, we see teams cut bait with players and go with a veteran minimum contract or, carry the minimum roster spots, 11. We're going to see an example of a team that currently has 10 healthy players to start the WNBA season. And I'm going to nitpick that a little bit, but, ultimately, until we understand what the new CBA is going to be in the WNBA, this is the system, and it's very, very hard on young players. And so on April 15th, so let me back up. So the fourth-year team option is an exception to the rule that teams can't guarantee more than 6 contracts. So if you can have 6 guaranteed contracts, and then if you have drafted a player that you really like, you're developing her, the deadline is May 15th. So May 15th, going into a player's 3rd year, you can exercise the 4th-year option. So essentially a year in advance, the team has the ability to exercise this 4th-year option. What does that mean? So they're already going into their 3rd season on this standard rookie contract. Because, right, hopefully that's self-explanatory. If a player is cut at any time, their standard rookie deal is terminated. And so then there's no options to talk about. So Aaliyah Boston is the best way to illustrate this. So Aaliyah Boston, number 1 overall pick, one of the best players in the WNBA. She's played 2 years for the Fever on a CBA cost-controlled salary. The number 1 pick makes the same amount as the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pick. On April 15th, the Fever exercised Aaliyah's 4th-year team option. So what does that mean? So she has a salary for this season, year 3. It is not guaranteed because rookie scale contracts in the WNBA are not guaranteed. So in theory, if Aaliyah was not able to play this season, the Fever could cut her and not have to pay her that salary. Now that would be a short-sighted move for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that Aaliyah Boston is one of the best players in the league and a future face of the league. But here's the interesting piece. So if Aaliyah couldn't play this year, Indiana would be able to get out of paying her salary entirely. Alternatively, they had this deadline to exercise her 4th-year option. And by exercising it, it guarantees the salary. So if you're following me, Aaliyah is currently playing on a non-guaranteed deal this entire summer. But on April 15th, Indiana said, we are going to guarantee Aaliyah's salary in year 4. And the way it works under the CBA is that salary actually jumps up a bit. So, like that is in a vacuum, it is good for the player. The calculation, if you're curious, you take 15% of the year 2 salary, which in Aaliyah's case would be about $11.4K, $11,400, more or less. You add that to the year 3 salary. So this year, Aaliyah is set to make $83,371. You add the 11.4K and you get to about $94,800. That is her year 4 salary. That is now guaranteed. And so for a player like Aaliyah, these are no-brainer decisions. I mean, Indiana would be foolish and would be inviting a lot of hate and a lot of political fire if they even considered cutting Aaliyah Boston. But it's not as easy or not as straightforward a choice for players with, less potential or have had less invested in them. And so as we move down the line, you'll see examples of teams going in other directions. So there were 12 players. Shout out to Richard Cohen, who does an incredible job over at Her Hoop Stats. He was tracking that there was 12 players that were eligible for a 4th-year team option this spring. The deadline was May 15th. So we saw Aaliyah had hers picked up on April 15th. The next player that we saw was Maddie Seagrass, the number 3 overall pick. The Wings exercised that option on May 6th. Then we actually saw Niara Sabally have her option picked up because she was injured in what would have been her first year. And so she is now effectively on the same track as a 2023 draft pick. And so her 4th year would be for 2026. The Liberty picked that up on May 12th. We saw on May 15th, Minnesota exercise their options on Diamond Miller as well as Dorka Juhas, who was a 2nd-round pick but was eligible. And Minnesota has done I think, a really good job of building continuity by drafting players and standing by them. We'll get to that a little later in the show. Some of their more recent draft selections, I think they've really gone to bat and fought for them to stay on the roster. Hey, we're developing you. We're investing in you. You might not be getting the playing time today that you want, but you're a part of this franchise moving forward. And then the other option that was picked up was Seattle Storm exercised their option on Jordan Horston. Now, this is despite the fact that Horston tore her ACL during AAU play. And so she's going to miss this season for the Storm. Her contract is suspended, so they don't owe her any money for year 3, but she is guaranteed to make her money for year 4. So that's interesting, right? Like, again, I was pointing out the difference between, different players in different situations. For Seattle, they want Jordan to be a part of their team long term, so they're guaranteeing her salary next summer. Hey, you don't have to worry about where you're going to play your next WNBA game. Alternatively, because of the rules under the CBA, Seattle was able to suspend Horston's contract for this season. And so even though Horston tore her ACL, because she tore her ACL, she's not going to make any money from her WNBA team this summer. And that's specifically because she tore her ACL competing for another team. And if you at home are wondering, well, wait a minute. The only reason she plays international is so that she can make more money because she can't make that much money in the WNBA. You're not wrong. You're not wrong, but that is where we find ourselves today. That is where we find ourselves today. So we could definitely get far afield and keep talking about this issue, but I want to make sure we keep things moving. I did want to highlight, so Lou Lopez Sanechal was the number 5 pick in the 2023 draft. She was not given a guaranteed 4th-year team option, but Dallas will retain her exclusive rights by suspending her contract. So they'll be able to exclusively negotiate with her for 2026. Haley Jones was the number 6 pick. She's played all 80 games since joining the Atlanta Dream. She only averaged 3.8 points a game, 2.3 rebounds, 2.2 assists in 16 minutes. But if you prorate that out over starters' minutes, that's not bad for a young player. Number 6 overall pick, certainly had potential, but I just don't think that her jump shot has developed the way that Atlanta wanted under the new coaching staff, Carlos Mesco. if you can't rebound with great size or shoot extremely well, there isn't a guaranteed role for you. So unfortunately, Haley Jones did not have her option picked up. And as we saw elsewhere, Haley Jones was ultimately waived by the Dream as well. So kind of self-explanatory. If you're getting waived, your 4th-year option also not picked up. Grace Berger, another example, the number 7 pick from the 2023 draft, was waived by Indiana earlier in the offseason, but claimed on waivers by the Minnesota Lynx. So at the time, Minnesota wasn't sure what they were going to do in the draft. They weren't sure how many roster spots they would have. And so they claimed Grace Berger off waivers, which means that her standard deal remained in place, right? Her contract wasn't terminated because Minnesota said, hey, we'll claim that. We will claim that off waivers. But a couple months later, and they cut Berger on May 14th. That move was aligned with the signing of Jessica Shepard on a veteran minimum. And, so this is where we are in the WNBA. Berger's salary was projected to be $80,000. And Jessica Shepard's veteran minimum, $78,800. That's not even a gap of $2K, but those things matter. We're gonna highlight examples today of like $2,000 can really matter for these WNBA teams under the hard salary cap. So we're gonna talk more about that, but very tough for Berger. Letitia Emma here, number 8 pick. She was claimed off waivers this offseason as well by the new expansion team, Golden State Valkyries, but was cut on May 14th. Ultimately, not a long-term part of their future. But we'll see. We'll see if she gets picked up on a substandard deal at some point this year. And then the other 2 players to note were former 3rd-round picks in 2022. These are international players who they came overseas in 2023, and so they were eligible for a 4th-year team option, but did not have them picked up. So we're seeing Sika Kone still with the Washington Mystics. She was traded there last year, but she will now be set to become an unrestricted free agent in 2026. And Jade Melbourne out of Australia, also a former 3rd-round pick in 2022. She will become an unrestricted free agent next year. And so before we dive into all 13 teams, I do want to just touch on something, again, with the help of Richard Cohen, who does a great job for her hoop stats and is very helpful on social media, always tweeting out different rules, different procedural pieces here and there. It takes 48 hours for a player to clear waivers. And so as we saw players get cut from training camp, which is the off season, another team can claim that player off waivers within 48 hours and keep that deal before it terminates. Alternatively, bear in mind that specifically when you think about opening day rosters, right? Like a team's roster on opening day does not have to be fixed in place for any specific amount of time, but there is a wrinkle where if a player is cut by a team in the offseason, so before opening day, beyond clearing waivers, that team can't go back to the player and re-sign them for a smaller deal, for a prorated deal, anything like that for 10 days. So it's not until day 11, if that player clears waivers, on day 11, the team can come back to the player and say, hey, we want to renegotiate. We want to negotiate a new deal with you. And if that player doesn't have any other better option, they'll probably listen. They'll probably take the meeting. They'll probably consider coming back to the team on a hardship exemption or a 7-day contract or something like that. And so in the case of Grace Berger, for example, Minnesota ultimately decided to waive her. So instead of having a salary of $80K for this year, Minnesota could go back to her after that 10-day period and say, hey, we're going to offer you your base minimum based on the fact that you haven't played 3 years of service or more as a veteran. We can offer you the base minimum. A player between 0 and 2 years of service is entitled to a base minimum of $66,079. That's a $14K gap. Basically, Grace Berger gets cut so that less than 2 weeks later, her new demand, her new leverage, her new circumstance is I'm not entitled to 80K. I'm only in my minimum is 66K. Now, if a team has cap space, they can obviously give a player more money. But as I'm trying to spell out, as I'm trying to make obvious, teams have all the leverage in this environment where, for the most part, we're going to see a couple exceptions, Golden State, Connecticut, but, Washington, but teams that are competing for the playoffs don't have cap space to pay a player any more than the minimum. And really what that is, hey, we can't offer you a standard deal. We can't offer you a full season contract. We'll sign you with a hardship exemption when we are entitled to. We'll sign you to a 7-day contract if we have an open roster spot, but we're not going to give you a standard deal. Now, there's a whole other thing that we can talk about, but it's sort of outside of the scope of today's podcast. The mid-season cut down date, and after the midpoint of the year, all contracts become standardized. But we'll have time during the regular season to go over those more nerdy details. I just want to really drive home the point that a player like Grace Berger, under the current system, she comes into training camp saying, hey, if I make myself indispensable, a team is going to pay me $80,000 this year. And the reality is that salary number almost works against Grace Berger. I mean, it does. It does, in fact, work against her. And it is much more likely that she will make less than $66,000 this year because she won't be on a WNBA roster for the entire season. So it'll end up being some sort of prorated amount. It really depends on how many substandard deals she can compete for and can secure for herself in the season. It's a hard system. And so before we get into the teams, I'll sort of put this out there. This past week, if you didn't see, Bill Simmons interviewed WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. Fascinating interview. And Kathy drove home the point that she is well aware that the players, the vast majority of them, have aligned up their free agency on the other side of these CBA negotiations. So 80% of the league are veterans that are set to be free agents in 2026. And then on top of that, you have a 2-team expansion draft that will take place. So there's more roster spots, more transactions that need to occur. So it's going to be a really wild ride over the next 12 months. I mean, when we're doing this a year from now, breaking down WNBA training camp, 15 teams in the league, many more roster spots, hopefully a much more expansive, a much more robust system for contracts and salary. But until we get there, this is the system we have. Let's start getting into some of these teams. Why don't we start with the defending champions, the New York Liberty? And I wrote about this on my LinkedIn page as well. A+ performance by Jonathan Colt. A+. Really the standard for GM in the WNBA. The Liberty were able to get themselves to a 12-man roster. Now, part of that was some very unfortunate news with Benijah Laney's injury. She's going to miss this season. Her contract was suspended for 2025. And so that, from a salary cap standpoint, definitely opened up optionality for the Liberty. Alternatively, Jonathan did a really, really great job of using his relationships with a superstar like Breanna Stewart, with a young up-and-coming talent like Marie Johannes, and convincing individual players to make decisions that would be best for the team. So, for example, Breanna Stewart, who was given the core designation, was entitled to a salary as high as $249K. But instead, she took a $208,000 salary. That wiggle room immediately shows up where they're able to sign veteran minimums for players like Isabel Harrison, Kennedy Burke. Then you factor in Rebecca Gardner's on the base minimum, only $66K. Jonathan's able to convince Maureen Johannes, one of the most talented players in the whole world, come back to New York for the base minimum, $66K. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Maureen Johannes was making 3 times that amount in 2026. But for this year, to come back to the defending champion Liberty and compete for a championship in the W, she takes the pay cut, or, she takes the smaller amount of money. The Liberty have Mercury Davis on a rookie scale deal, only making $71.7K next year. And so even though they lose Courtney Vandersloot in free agency, they lose Kayla Thornton in the expansion draft to Golden State, Jonathan just had things prepared, and he was able to fill out not even an 11-man roster, a 12-man roster, because they kept Jalen Sherrod out of Colorado as a guard in training camp. She played for the Liberty a little bit last year on some substandard deals, and so they like her. They're going to keep her around. Obviously, they have entrenched stars in Jonquel Jones, Leonie Phoebish in year 2, Niara Sabali in year 3. And then, probably the biggest thing that Jonathan was able to do this offseason in terms of creativity was really well-timed and well-sourced trade between the Connecticut Sun to get Natasha Cloud. Originally, Cloud gets to the Connecticut from Phoenix, did not want to be there. And Jonathan was able to, I think for a very reasonable price, they trade away a first-round pick in April's draft, so Connecticut can get another young player in their system, and they're able to get Natasha Cloud just a great value. She's the new starting point guard. They were losing Sloot, now they have Cloud, and I think you can make an argument that if not for the Laney injury, the Liberty are just better. They're just better than a season ago. And even with the Laney injury, I think that they're one of the favorites to win, and they have a great team. And so you got to give, Jonathan just a whole lot of love for that. Just to clarify, from earlier, Lainey Hamilton's contract is suspended. So, the Liberty not on the hook to pay her for this year. I'm sure they'll want to take advantage of the exclusive negotiating rights with Lainey for 2026. And we'll see what the marketplace looks like for players like her next year. The key difference is that in Lainey's situation, she was hurt playing in a different league. So to compare and contrast, we'll talk about Katie Lou Samuelson later. She was injured while under the auspices of Seattle, and so they have to pay her that money. Lainey Hamilton got hurt playing in Unrivaled, and so reportedly the insurance that Unrivaled carries is going to pay Benijah Lainey her salary of $185,000 this year. So if you were curious, Lainey is going to get her money. She's going to get it from the insurance company that Unrivaled works with. And that's actually one of 2 contracts that are suspended by the Liberty, because the Liberty also are invested in Anika Saltau. I hope I'm saying that right. She's an undrafted player, but they like her. They signed her in April 2025, but her contract is going to be suspended. So there will be exclusive rights for her and the Liberty to negotiate next year. So keep an eye out on her as a potential rotation piece in 2026. Next, why don't we move to the Minnesota Lynx? Went to the WNBA Finals last year, could absolutely go back to the WNBA Finals. They spent just about every penny they could. They're down to less than $7,000 in cap space. They have a 12-man roster. One of the more interesting additions they made was through the draft. They took in the first round Anastasia Alare-Kosu, a Russian player, very good potential, very good size at the forward spot. And Kosu came over. I think there was a suspicion that maybe she would be a draft and stash, and that would sort of clarify how many veteran spots Minnesota would have at the bottom of their roster. But they were able to bring Kosu over. She's going to play from day one. I mentioned earlier Diamond Miller still on the team, and in fact had her 4th-year team option picked up. So, we know what this team is. They're going to have the same starting lineup as last year: Williams, McBride, Carlton, Collier, Smith, and then Heidemann, Miller. Elisa Pilley is still on this team. They're going to play Kosu from day one, and then they have a couple bigs. Shepard, as I mentioned earlier, is on the team with the veteran minimum. So, they're going to have a competitive team. They're going to be able to play a full rotation from day one. Notably, even though they exercised the fourth-year team option on her, Dorka Yukaz is going to be sitting out the 2025 season with a suspended contract. She's injured. And so then just procedurally to go through it, on May 11th, Minnesota was down to 13 players, and they had about $73,000 to work with. So based on who they had in camp at that time, they could cut one player between Collier, Carlton, Miller, Berger, Shepard, or Peely. It wasn't going to be Kosu. And so by May 14th, we see that Berger was in fact gone. We already went over from a cost perspective, why they went in that direction. And look, like, I think if you really wanted to boil down this offseason or this training camp to Minnesota was excited about the idea of bringing Kosu over, and that led them to make some choices like part ways with Berger and prioritize some of their younger players at the bottom of the roster and say, hey, we're going to be leaning hard on our starters and hide him in as a veteran guard on the wing. Like, we'll see if Carly Samuelson is going to get bigger minutes on the wing. I think Diamond Miller is going to have to be a real fixture and play a big role on the wing for them. But, really excited to see how Minnesota approaches this year. And they don't have, with less than $7,000 in cap space, they are not going to be able to compete for players on substandard deals, which means if they have significant injury concerns during the year, it is going to be very hard for them to fill out a full rotation. I could see a situation for them where they end up with only 10 players for prolonged stretches of the season. That might put some additional wear and tear on their veteran players. So we'll see how that goes. Alternatively, I think that this all bodes well for Nafisa Collier's MVP chances because she's going to probably have to play 37, 38 minutes a game, especially in the biggest matchups. Let's move next to the LA Sparks, a team that I'm very, very, very excited for this year. Not in the least of which because of their first round pick, Sarah Ashley Barker. And just can't wait. Cam Brink isn't back on the court yet, but they have so many young players. I can't wait to see them all together. And with Kelsey Plum out there as a fearless leader and, really the big tentpole star that they've been waiting for. Their opening day roster size is 12, but it's really going to be 10 or 11 because of injuries, not just Cam Brink recovering from her lower body injury, but Alamond is slowly returning after missing all of the 2024 season. We saw some tough cuts out of the Sparks camp, some of the toughest cuts that we saw. Probably most notably, Ari McDonald, the former number 3 pick in 2021. She played really good minutes for the Sparks last year. And so there was a feeling that she was on a track to be back with the Sparks as a part of the rotation. Unfortunately, she was let go. I would say that she's at the top of the list, not just for the Sparks, but really anybody looking to pick up players to sign on substandard deals. She's just a really talented guard. So, hope she gets back into the league soon. They also had to cut center Masha Kliandakova, who is 26. She was a very highly touted player, international big. And so things haven't really stuck for her in the W. It's not too late, but obviously her not making the final roster with the Sparks is a tough break there. And then their final cut was young Australian guard Shanice Swain. They took her with the number 14 pick in 2023. So that's another example of a player taken relatively high just 2 years ago. And now she is looking for a home. We'll see if she can bounce back into the W later this summer. I will say very excited for Sonia Fagan as a big who was drafted in the second round by the Sparks. She was able to make it out of camp and is on this team. I'm a big fan. Has a lot of untapped potential out of South Carolina. And I think specifically on the offensive end, as like a offensive big that you bring off the bench, maybe she starts the second and fourth quarters, you give her a look, you run some pick and roll, see if she can hit a few jumpers, see if she can, attack the offensive glass. And I think especially in the beginning of the year with Cam Brink missing time, I think Sonia Fagan is a big outcome for her. Excited for her as a rookie to make the team. and I forget if I said this at the top, they have about $31,000 in cap space. So they will be able to offer hardship exemptions. And considering that they really only have 10 healthy players to start the year, I would not be shocked if they reach into that salary cap exception and sign one or two players right away. But we'll see what they end up doing. Next up, a team in a very advantageous position when it comes to salary cap management. Washington Mystics, they have an opening day roster of 12 and about $394,000 in cap space. Notably, 12-man roster, even though they had no free agents sign and they did not acquire any players via trade. They had 8 players who ended the season last year with the Mystics, retained those 8, and they drafted 4. And so, the biggest story was regrettably that Georgia Amore, one of their draft picks, tore her ACL. And so they have a 12-man roster, only 11 healthy players. And so even though they have plenty of money, the decision is, because Georgia Amore, right, she's a rookie, non-guaranteed salary, and she got injured in the Mystics training camp. So just to slow down and make sure that my audience understands, because she was injured in training camp, even though she had a non-guaranteed deal, the Mystics are on the hook. And so, especially as a number 6 overall pick, someone that they're invested in for the long term, at least ostensibly, the decision is we're going to carry Georgia Amore on the roster. We're not going to cut her. We're not going to suspend her. We're going to pay her. She's going to rehab on our dime, and we'll bring her back in 2026. But what that means is that the Mystics only have 11 healthy players. They cut Pretel, Green, Jensen, Cave. Lucy Olson, a second rounder, was able to stick with the team. Really excited about that. And I mentioned, I actually thought that there was a chance Lucy Olson could win the starting point guard job. So, shout out to Villanova, and also she played at Iowa. I think Olson is going to have a great rookie year, and I think her and Georgia Amore long-term are going to be 2 guards that share the court together. They'll probably compete for the starting point guard job next year. So, really excited about the Mystics this season. Obviously, no expectations that they'll make the playoffs this year. But, I think that really frees them up to be as young as possible, to play fast and loose. So really excited for that group. And again, they have enough cap space where they could do a whole lot of things in season. They can make trades where they acquire a lot of salary. They could, if they have injuries occur, they can sign hardship exemptions. So they're going to be fine in terms of their flexibility. Next up, a team also rebuilding, also very promising, but much, much, much different situation. Dallas Wings. They have an opening day roster size of 12, but for now it's actually 11. Current remaining cap space is only $16,000. And let's kind of walk through the procedure here. Remember, teams can have as many as 18 players in training camp. And so a lot of times at the end of April, no one's been cut yet. Usually early May, right? That's when we start seeing teams shrink that list from 18 down closer to 12. And so on May 4th, we saw Dallas cut Makia Herbert Harrigan. She was on the veteran minimum. Then on May 11th, a week later, only 13 players left in camp. And Dallas had about $62,800 over the cap. And so if you're paying attention, right, the base minimum is $66K. If Dallas is $62,000 over the cap, that means that they could cut any of their unprotected players, and assuming they made at least that base minimum, they'd be able to get under the salary cap, and that's exactly what they did. They ultimately decided that rookie guard J.J. Quinterly and wing Kayla Charles, they played well enough in camp to earn spots, and that final decision that they had to make was really in regard to their post players. And so on May 14th, they made their final cut. They waived Joyner Holmes, who had bounced around several WNBA teams in recent years as a backup. Alternatively, the player that they kept, Luisa Gesell-Soder, a German big. She was drafted originally by the Wings in 2020. She's never been in the WNBA, She's been developing overseas. She was actually in France in the finals of a 3-game series. So she missed camp. That meant that she's temporarily suspended, but she is going to be on this Dallas Wings roster. She was ultimately the final priority for them. And what I'll say is this, with $16,000, I think that Dallas is going to have a 12-man roster. If they can avoid a ton of injuries, if they can stay relatively healthy, they'll probably roll that cap space as far into the season as they can. Maybe by, if they needed to sign a hardship player, or if they really felt like they couldn't go a prolonged stretch with only 11 players, or if they had a lot of injuries, they don't want to only have 10. They have enough room where they could sign some 7-day contracts here or there and piece things together. Dallas doesn't have humongous expectations for this season, but alternatively, you want to make sure that you have a competent roster around Paige. So I think for the most part, we know what they're doing this year. Next up, I want to talk about the Atlanta Dream. This was a team where pretty much from the beginning, they were telegraphing that they were going to be an 11-man roster. So they're carrying the minimum 11 roster spots. They only have $23,939 left to spend, so just under $24K. A year ago, so they lost Tina Charles, they lost Cayenne Parker-Tyus, they lost Ariel Powers, and they decided to waive Letitia Amahir and Haley Jones. They also decided to waive their number 17 pick from this past draft, Cheyenne Sellers. Just does not look like her body is responding well right now to lower body injuries that she's had. And so they didn't have the cap space to carry a 12th roster spot anyway. And the big thing I'll say, I think it was really exciting to see their 3rd-round pick, Taylor Thierry, make the final roster as a 3rd-round pick. A lot of promise as a 3-and-D player and a strong role player coming out of Ohio State. And, let's celebrate a great young player, Tahina Paopao. Paopao should not have gone as low as she did. The number 18 pick in this past draft. She appears to be thriving under her new head coach, Carl Smesko's system. The way that Atlanta is spacing the floor, making sure that whatever front court players they have out there, they're not afraid to take and make shots. That's just opening up driving lanes. And Paopao is she's such a lethal shooter, such an elite offensive player. Again, she should not have gone as low as she did. And I think Atlanta really came away with one of the steals of the draft. And, look, I think Atlanta, they're going to be going hard for a playoff spot. I really like the idea of Paopao being able to contribute from day one, and they're having lineups out there with Griner, Brianna Jones, of course, Ryan Howard, and then Paopao as, nominally their lead guard. Jordan Canada is, of course, their starting point guard. I think Canada and Paopao could play a little bit together too. So really excited for what Atlanta looks like this year, and, different pick and roll combinations, Paopao and Coffee, Paopao and Griner, Paopao and Jones. So really excited for this group. Most unique circumstance in the league has to be the Golden State Valkyries as an expansion team. Not a ton to say here because they had so much money and literally had a wide open roster. No, they weren't a team. They weren't a team last year. So they have a 12-man roster now. They have about $352,000 in cap space, so they could do whatever they want in season money-wise. May 14th, they made the difficult decision to cut Amahir, Chen, Torre, Bibby, and Cunane. Some of those were pretty obvious, even from the beginning of training camp. It was a bit of a surprise that they ended up keeping Kiara Linskens, but they really like her size. She projects to be, an interesting big. And I think that the fact that Amahir had the 4th-year team option that was going to be more expensive, they're not the only team to make the decision that, we're going to cut the more expensive player and continue to retain a younger, more affordable development project. If Linskens can make it to the end of the year for them, they'll actually control her rights next year. That was another consideration for them. And then I think the other big storyline to follow was Janelle Saloon out of France. Clearly was a priority, not just to make sure that she was a part of their team, but I think that there's actually an indication that she'll be coming over sooner than later because they didn't even temporarily suspend her, right? Like they have so much money that they could temporarily suspend Saloon, who was still playing in the Italian finals as recently as last week, suspend her as a 13th player, carry 12-man, and then when she is ready to come to the States, they could cut that 12th player and bring Saloon over. But they're just gonna start the year right away with Saloon as one of their final 12, and she's gonna figure very, very much into their plans. The other thing I'll say, Valkyries being such an international roster, it is notable that even though one of their best players, Carla Late, she's already said she's not going to play Eurobasket this year, which is in June. But the Valkyries could still have as many as 5 other players that decide to play in Eurobasket, which means that leaves Golden State needing to, sign some hardships, sign some substandard deals to fill out their roster. And that absolutely is part of why they have all that money. They weren't in a hurry to spend all of it because, they're going to probably need to make a lot of substandard deals to fill out their full roster over the course of the regular season. They're not going to win that many games this year. Let's just be honest. But I will say, and I'm not, ready to talk about the regular season games just yet, but Julie Van Loo is the truth, yo. Julie Van Loo is the truth. The way she was hitting shots and rocking that Bay Area crowd, like you can tell she is going to be a special, special player in a Valkyries uniform. And she reminds me of Marie Johannes in terms of her ability to excite the crowd with jump shots, with making moves, passes, quick decisions off the dribble. And so just really, really excited for her and really that whole guard rotation. I mean, the Valkyries aren't going to be a very good team, but Veronica Burton, Carla Late, Julie Van Loo, Tiffany Hayes, Kate Martin, that is an outstanding guard rotation. An absolutely outstanding guard rotation. And I actually want to include one other note on Golden State. This goes back to the Bill Simmons, Kathy Engelbert interview. Very interesting to hear. According to Kathy Engelbert, less than 5% of Golden State Valkyries season ticket holders are also Golden State Warriors season ticket holders. That's fascinating to me because we know that Golden State Valkyries are doing great with their season tickets and with their ticket sales for their first year. But I guess I just would have assumed that there was more of an overlap between Valkyries and Warriors fans, both because from an income standpoint, if you can afford Warriors season tickets, you can definitely afford Valkyries. And, I just figured that Golden State Warriors fans would have an early opportunity to buy in and invest. And if they're already folks that go to the Chase Center regularly or invested in the Chase Center, I just figured that they would jump at the chance. But I know from my own experience being at a company, BSE Global, which owns the Barclays Center, not every NBA fan is a WNBA fan. Not every WNBA fan is an NBA fan. And you can't force that. You can't force that. So I think that having a diversity of consumers where you have people in your building who, every now and again, they might come out to a Warriors game, but they're there for the Valkyries. And I think tracking that as a business and making sure that you are catering to the needs of those different consumer blocks and making sure that they feel as welcomed in the building as any other consumer at any other time in the calendar, that's the challenge. So, that was just really interesting to hear. Next up, the Connecticut Sun. So they're currently carrying 13 players. They have $193,000 left in cap space. That's plenty. And so Connecticut, they're carrying 13. It's because they actually had so much money that they were willing to cut a protected player, or else they would have even more money. So they decided to cut Yvonne Anderson, who had a protected deal, for $85,000. They're just going to pay her to go away, which is an interesting choice. She's free to sign with any other team. and she would make money on top of that. I think the more controversial choice was Diamond DeShields. She was hurt for virtually all of training camp, and the decision was made that Connecticut was going to waive her, but because she was injured under the auspices of the Connecticut Sun, they had a doctor rule that Diamond DeShields was going to miss approximately 3 weeks, which entitled her to an injury settlement of $20,294. So you do all the accounting there. Connecticut, they paid Yvonne Anderson $85,000 to go away. They paid Diamond DeShields about $20,300 to go away. They were totally allowed to do so in both cases, and they have nearly $200,000 still remaining in cap space. Of course, they're a rebuilding team now. They're going to be trying to be as young as possible on the floor. Part of why they can carry 13 players right now is because one of their most promising players, Leila Lacan, is still in France. The French finals, which I mentioned earlier, 3-game series, very, very exciting basketball. Lacan actually had 21 points in a blowout victory in that series, but she wasn't originally on the opening day roster. And so Connecticut has the money to temporarily suspend Lacan, make sure she's getting paid, and then carry 12 roster spots in the meantime. So it's really a 12+1 if you think about it. But I think in due time, Lacan will just come over and she'll be one of the biggest parts of their rotation this year. I want to point out from a business standpoint 2 things. One, great scoop made by Sportico to announce that the Connecticut Sun are going to be for sale. The franchise is for sale. They were valued by Sportico last year at $80 million. That price continues to go up across all markets. And so even though this is the WNBA's smallest market, I think that a 9-figure price has to be the goal. I mean, anything less than $100 million for a WNBA franchise, I feel like just runs contrary to what the league is trying to do from a business standpoint. And then I also think related to that, the elephant in the room is that Connecticut is probably just too small of a market to stay in the league long term. I don't think it's impossible that this ownership sale could keep the team in Connecticut, but I think it's just as likely that the new owners are looking to immediately relocate the franchise. And so if, for example, the Boston Celtics ownership just changed hands, $6 billion sale, there is no rule against that new ownership group for the Boston Celtics getting involved here, purchasing the Sun, and then adding the Connecticut Sun to their portfolio and saying, oh, by the way, now that we're going to call them the Boston Sun, and they're going to play at the TD Garden in Boston, which, by the way, the Connecticut Sun already play some of their home games at the Boston TD Garden. So to me, that's like kind of an obvious option would be, hey, why don't we just have the Celtics buy the Sun and they can move to Boston? I think alternatively, a situation I would love to see come to fruition as someone that used to live in Philadelphia and loves Philadelphia. You know, we've seen that the Wells Fargo Center, which is half owned by Harris Blitzer and then also owned by Comcast, there's now going to be a cooperation between Comcast and Harris Blitzer to build a new basketball arena in Philadelphia. And so what this would allow is the city of Philadelphia gets to keep the Sixers in Philly. And instead of the team moving to New Jersey or because southern New Jersey is very close to Philly, or in a more congested part of the urban metropolitan area of Philadelphia, there were plans for years and years. Harris Blitzer wanted to build an arena in Chinatown in Philly, which would have been terrible for that community, but also for traffic. And so the city of Philadelphia has been able to negotiate kind of a cooperative relationship between the city, Comcast, Harris Blitzer. And part of that announcement a couple months ago was, yeah, we would love to also bring a WNBA team to Philly. So I'm just saying, like, I think the Northeast, they don't want to lose a team. Obviously, there's been more expansion to the West. I think the Northeast, whether it's Boston, whether it's Philly. There's some other cities we can mention. I think that the Northeast is going to fight really hard to keep a franchise. And if it's not going to be in Connecticut, there's plenty of other big cities that they can move to. So excited to see where that goes. And also, obviously, there is a team moving to Toronto in 2026, but you know, an American bias. Can we keep a team in the American Northeast? We'll see. We'll see. I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, so obviously I have a lot of affection for North Atlantic, Northeast basketball. Coming down the home stretch here, the Indiana Fever, we haven't talked about them yet. They have an 11-man roster to open the season. So again, they're another team that's carrying the minimum. They only have $43,000 in cap space remaining. So they didn't have room for a full 12th roster spot. At least 9 spots were essentially guaranteed at the beginning of training camp. And really that number could have been as high as 10 if you were pretty sure that Breonna Turner, as a veteran, was going to be valued over some of the younger players. Notably, the Fever drafted the number 19 pick and the number 20 pick this past year. They decided to keep Michaela Timpson out of Florida State. They did not keep Bree Hall, which is regrettable. Bree Hall, great college basketball player, should have a bright future in the WNBA. Hopefully is able to log some minutes and sign some substandard deals to get back into the WNBA before long. The other player that was waived by the Fever on May 13th, Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown had a decent chance of making the final roster. But again, Indiana decides to go with Timpson, who is an athletic forward, a shot blocker. I think someone who they just project to be a better fit playing alongside Caitlin Clark long-term. And then that $43,000 in cap space, right? That's not enough to sign a player to a standard deal. But Richard Cohen has already calculated that a prorated base minimum beginning on June 27th would be able to get that done. So by late June, look for Indiana to sniff around signing a player, 12th player. They could also, alternatively, they could begin handing out 7-day contracts sooner than that and kind of go piecemeal, maybe 1 week at a time with a 12th player, or as injuries demand that they consider expanding out their roster. The other thing too here is trades, right? That money could go toward making a trade where they receive more salary than they send out. So we'll have to pay attention to exactly how they handle that amount of money. Obviously, they're a competitive team. And so if they had any injury misfortune, they would want to bring in some warm bodies and make sure that they were fielding a competitive roster, right? So keep an eye on them between today and the midpoint of the season on July 14th, when all deals become standardized. We'll have to see what they do with that $43K. The Seattle Storm, they only have about $25,000 left to work with. They're actually going to be opening the season with 10 healthy players, so carrying the minimum. We've talked about her already. The reason why it's really a 10-man roster, not 11, is because of the injury to Katie Lou Samuelson. Very bizarre offseason for Katie Lou Samuelson, where she was with Indiana. She had a salary of 106. Well, she had a 6-figure salary and then agreed to a buyout with Indiana. And that buyout was for $106,419. So her and Indiana have a very awkward conversation where it's like, hey, we don't plan on playing you this year. We don't really have a spot for you. So we're going to buy you out. You're going to give us a little bit of a savings. Otherwise, we're going to just pay you the cash to go away. Very bizarre. Very awkward. But by all accounts, it was handled cooperatively, because she then signs a $90,000 deal with the Storm, and it was going to be an interesting role for her as a wing forward for Seattle. Obviously, Seattle's going to be a competitive team this year, but then she tears her ACL, and so from a business of basketball standpoint, obviously you don't want to tear your ACL. We're wishing Katie Lou a full recovery and hope to see her back in the WNBA in 2026. But on a positive, she did make herself $196,000 this year. So from a business of basketball standpoint, you got to applaud her and her representation for getting two deals that add up to a really, really nice payday. I mean, most players in the WNBA don't come close to making $190,000 in a single season. So we'll miss her. We're going to root for her to come back in 2026. But in the meantime, she at least is going to, have a handsome reward financially. And again, so this leaves Seattle with only 10 healthy players and not that much money to solve any problems that arise between now and the end of the year. So, a 12th rostered player on a prorated minimum salary, they wouldn't be able to afford that until the end of July, which notably that's after the midpoint of the season, after the cut down date, after all deals have to become standardized. So this really could be as straightforward as Seattle has to get themselves through July as healthy as possible, right? If they have to sign any hardship exemptions, that's going to drain even more of that cap space. If they can take as much of that $25,000 into the end of July as possible, then they could consider signing a player for a prorated minimum salary, and then they would have a warm body to play at the end of the rotation. So we'll see. I'm very high on Seattle this year. I'm wishing them nothing but good luck and good fortune, and hopefully they can string things along. This is why the hard salary cap environment is so punitive. Seattle's trying to win the championship this year, and they're going to be stuck with 10 players most of the year. Home stretch here, Las Vegas Aces, they're actually opening the season with 13 players, and their current cap space is negative $66,079. That is for a very specific reason. It is because of the childbirth pregnancy exemption. Cheyenne Parker Tyus, we wish her well in her pregnancy and the future of her family. Vegas is using that exception to keep her as part of the franchise. But, she's not going to play this year. And so literally down to the penny, Vegas had just enough money to field a 12-man roster and give Parker Tyus the childbirth pregnancy exemption. They ended up keeping Aaliyah Nye, who looks outstanding as a draft pick this year, one of the best shooters in the draft, really, really, really promising offensive player. Elizabeth Kitley, who will be making her WNBA debut after a great career as a big at Virginia Tech and being injured last year. So really excited for Kitley to get a chance to play at this level. And then rounding things out at power forward, Crystal Bradford. So, this is a competitive team. This is one of the best teams in the league. And, I'm really excited to see, what specifically Nye and Kitley can do as part of this rotation. They still have players like Kirsten Bell, Kia Stokes, Tiffany Mitchell's on the team. So Dana Evans is now with the Aces. So I'm really, really excited. I think they handled their offseason brilliantly. And go figure, the best franchises in the league, Liberty, Aces, Minnesota Lynx, they were able to navigate their offseason very effectively, very efficiently, and field title contending teams. Chicago Sky, they have a 12-man roster. They have $56,903 left in cap space. They were able to sign Vandersloot as a unrestricted free agent. They were able to trade for Ariel Atkins. They did not invite Kennedy Carter to training camp. Kennedy Carter not in the WNBA this year, which is not without its controversy. But ultimately, the Sky really was confident that they could build a 12-man roster that they could be proud of. They did cut 3 players on May 11th, Morgan Birch, Jessica Carter, Alex Wilson, which then clarified who they would be keeping. They were the first team, in fact, to get down to a legal roster. They're keeping Banham and Jefferson. The number 10 pick from this past year, or from April, Ajsa Sivka. She's going to be a draft and stash for at least this first year, which, I think, again, like really clarified things because they were also able to come away with Haley Van Lith, who will be on this roster. So, Chicago, they're in a great spot. I think they're going to be a much improved team, a very good team, and they have the cap space to go out and get things done on the margins if and when they need to make those moves. So, excited to see what year 2 of the Angel Reese and Camila Cardoza experiment looks like and what this team does. One last team, the Phoenix Mercury. They didn't make any draft picks in April. And as far as the training camp procedure went, they had as wild a training camp as anybody just because they had so many unknowns on their team. They ultimately were able to clarify things by cutting Megan McConnell, Tamira Poindexter, Celeste Taylor. They kept Lexi held Alexis Prince on the perimeter, Catherine Westbeld on the inside. Recall that they gave a protected contract, a guaranteed contract to Khadija Laksa, and that's virtually unprecedented because she had never played a minute in the WNBA, but she's very, very promising as a tall shooter. She did miss most of training camp, though. She missed all of training camp playing in Italy, but now she, again, she had a guaranteed deal. She's going to be playing for the Phoenix Mercury this year. And then similarly, Mirjana Musa, she played in France in that French final, and so then she'll be joining the Mercury, although she's presently temporarily suspended. So they're carrying 13 players, but she'll arrive, and then they'll have to cut someone to open up that spot. Phoenix they have less than $20,000 left to work with, so they will want to clarify that as soon as possible, right? If they don't want Musa to be earning her paycheck day in, day out on a temporarily suspended deal. If I didn't explain this earlier, temporarily suspended contracts, the player doesn't get that money because they did not report, but the money counts against the cap. So that's the thing. For Phoenix, you want to clarify the situation as soon as possible. If Musa is in fact playing in the WNBA, let's get her over as soon as possible. That way they can stop double paying for both a 12th roster spot and Musa. And so I would expect that will get clarified sooner than later. What a time in the WNBA. Just happy to be a basketball person enjoying these incredible players and teams and competition. Stay well this week, everyone. Enjoy your basketball. Enjoy life. Enjoy the summer. Enjoy warm weather. Wishing you and yours well at this time. Thanks for listening. Stop double paying. Stop double paying. Enjoy life. Enjoy life. Stop double paying. Stop double paying. Stop double paying. Stop double paying. Enjoy life.